order. We started tonight's executive session starting at 6:01 p.m. and adjourned at 6:28. In that, we discussed strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, and no decisions were made. With that, I would ask that you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We are under a mask mandate from our Board of Health, but the mandate specifically stated if we can stay 6 feet away from each other, we can take our masks off. So given the huge crowd tonight, I'd say you can take your masks off if you are comfortable. If you are uncomfortable, we can move you to a spot that you can be comfortable. Public comment and announcement. And Joe, I will just start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening to you and members of the board. Good evening to the public assembled and folks watching online or television. As you can see in the agenda itself, there are two announcements before I turn over to my colleague for his announcement. Just a reminder that in 6 days, our special town meeting will occur at Monday, October 18th at 6:30 p.m. in the gymnasium of the community center. I can tell you that there's information on Channel 18 playing, some great work that the Voter Information Committee has done for information on the articles. We're also letting folks know that we will be meeting as we usually do, but we will not be utilizing the bleachers so that we can make sure we have that space distance. However, the non-resident voting area will still be to the moderator's right, and we'll still be able to accommodate everybody. So a special town meeting in, well, I'm going to say less than 6 days because it's 5 days, 23 hours, and 59 minutes. A reminder that the flu clinic for Harwich residents is starting tomorrow, October 13th, and repeating again on October 18th. Both days it's 1 to 3 p.m. at the Harwich Community Center at 100 Oak Street. And again, that is a drive-through flu clinic. Information on the website, and folks are certainly encouraged to participate and also check out the information in advance. I will defer to the chief if I could, Mr. Chairman, and I have one further comment on behalf of our DPW director.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, can I just briefly emphasize Joe's comment, because at a meeting last week with the Library Trust, and the Channel 18 is showing podcasts in preparation for the meeting. Be really important for, I'm hoping as many people as possible can view that to be prepared for the meeting. So, Joe, you mentioned, I just wanted to emphasize it.
Thank you.
Chief?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Dave Gilmet, Chief of Police. I forget when the meeting was, a couple months ago at least. We had an agenda item on noise and specifically discussed range use. So I'm coming before you tonight to kind of give you a heads up and wait for input if you have any, but there's some training coming up that I want you to be aware of that is not going to be all Harwich police related, and I'll explain. The first is like a day and a half. It's October 18th and 19th. It's a red dot instructor class, and this is occurring at our range for half a day on the 18th and a full day on the 19th, handgun only. 12 students only, but Harwich gets free seats in the class. Obviously, that's very attractive for us, and this is regarding getting trained as an instructor status for an optic on a handgun, which is where we see law enforcement moving in the future, so we just wanted to have our instructors up to date on that. So that's the day and a half of range training on the October 18th and 19th. The second thing is under police reform, we are looking at having to do additional firearms training for our reserve intermittent officers Cape-wide. And Andy Goddard, who was a lieutenant in Chatham, is actually a regional contact for the Municipal Police Training Committee, who is putting on what they call these bridge academies. And that's supposed to bridge the gap between a full-time police officer and a part-time police officer. And part of that is additional firearms training. So Andy has coordinated with Detective Sergeant Brackett to do a bridge academy training for firearms out at our range November 15th through the 19th. That will not involve any nighttime fire. It will be all handgun related, so we don't anticipate an awful lot of noise from that. And the only other addition to that is we will be doing our fall qualifications around that November week as well. That will involve low light, but we anticipate, I spoke with Detective Sergeant Brackett this afternoon, and we anticipate wrapping up by 7 or 8 o'clock at the latest because the daylight saving times is in effect, so it's darker sooner. And there will be rifle involved in that too, but that is our usual department fall qualification that we usually don't have any issue with.
Great.
Okay.
You'll notify the dispatcher so when the phone calls come in?
Yeah, absolutely. And we also posted on our Facebook, and Officer Pete Patel, our lead firearms instructor, has a couple people at least that he proactively contacts in advance whenever we're going to be training out there.
That's great. Thank you,
Yeah.
Chief. Any
Okay.
questions for the chief?
Just one question on 10, 18, and 19. What time of the day?
It's daytime, 8 to 4, I think. Yeah, 8 to 4, 9 to 5, around there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board?
No.
No.
Back to you, Joe.
Thank you. The notice from DPW Director Lynn Cooper today to Megan and I, and then generally to the board and the general public, alerting everybody that next Tuesday and Wednesday, October 19th and October 20th, it'll be necessary for the town to close down the town of Harwich disposal area. You may recall Article 12 at our 2020 annual town meeting. That was the outdoor one in September as opposed to the outdoor one in May, where the town approved the removal and installation of a new scale deck at the scale house at the disposal area. The contractor requires the exit lane be closed so that they can stage their crane, and anticipates this being a 2-day project. So again, the disposal area for the town of Harwich will be closed Tuesday, October 19th, and Wednesday, October 20th. There are signs that have been going up around town indicating that the disposal area will be closed, and Link and his team have been reaching out to the commercial haulers as well to give them notice. So we just want everyone to be aware of that. We appreciate their patience during this time, but we're very excited to have that new scale deck in place after that. So it'll definitely be a benefit for the community.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment and announcement?
Good evening, Cindy Williams, Executive Director of the Harwich Chamber. I just wanted to remind everyone, and I put this in front of all of you. I don't know if this is where I should show it, Jamie, or not, but I'll show it here. This is the dining passport. October is dining restaurant month, so we have 14 restaurants that are participating this year, and we added a little twist to it. So you need to dine in 6 or more of our restaurants that are participating, attach the receipts, and then return it to the chamber, where we do have the passports, so come on down. And then you're entered into the drawing, which is a picnic basket full of all kinds of goodies and gift cards to the 14 participating restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, public comment and announcement? A motion on the consent agenda?
I move that we vote to approve the resignation of John Larrabee from the Recreation and Youth Commission, and second, to vote to approve the Board of Selectmen meeting minutes, May 10th, 2021.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion. Don?
Yeah, I'd like to amend the motion to approve the minutes. On page 17 of the minutes, which would be 22 of the packet, it says that Mr. McCaskill said that he is reconsidering his motion. What you were really doing was changing it to a reconsideration motion. So you weren't reconsidering your first motion, it was a reconsideration motion.
Take your word for it, and I didn't pick that up.
And we all voted for it, because I didn't vote for the original motion.
So that amendment was part of your motion, Mary?
Yes, it
And it was
was.
part of your second, Larry?
It was.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, update from Ronay? Come, stand up,
Mr.
stand up
Chairman,
and tell.
If I
tell
may,
me.
I'm pleased to introduce our colleague, partner in government, Ronit Goldstein from Eversource. Ronit is really a partner in our government. Chief LeBlanc, Chief Gilmet, and others can attest to the fact that prior to storms and anything else, Ronit is always reaching out to us. She is more of a partner, being willing to talk about the vexing issue of double polls and what that means. And so, Mr. Chairman, at your direction, she's able to join us this evening in person.
Thank you, Ronit, and welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for saying my name. Is it Chairman McCaskill?
Yeah.
Yay. And members of the board, thank you for having me. My name is, and thanks for the nice introduction, Joe. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here in person. I think I've met some of you in the Hollywood squares of Zoom during the pandemic. It's really nice to be out and have the opportunity to interact with you in person and just to see our faces. I want to thank the board for having me here tonight. Thank you for approving some of the reliability projects that we're working on in town, both South and Gilbert. They're not in construction yet, but I know those went before the board for grants of location, so we appreciate the thought and the time that you took to review those, taking residents' comments into consideration, and then helping us to move them forward so that we can, supplement the reliability in Harwich that's needed. So I've been covering the Cape for a little over 2 years, and with the utility for just about 4. I'm rounding out the 4. I think I first met Chief Guillemette right before the tornadoes, so that was a tough way to meet your public safety officials, but we got through that successfully, and I'm happy to say that we do, I want to echo what Joe said, have a good relationship with the town and with your public safety officials. We appreciate the support of the board in a recent support letter regarding double poles, and that's why I'm here tonight. Certainly if there's questions on any other matter, I'm happy to answer. And I thought that I would come, I suggested, and Joe thought it was a good idea, that I come and just talk a little bit about the process, maybe level set a little bit. What is a double pole? Certainly tell me if you can't hear me. I've never been told that I can't be heard.
Julie, we have a problem with you.
So, or if I need to quiet down, you can tell me the same. So just a little bit of level setting, and rather than project a presentation, I was telling one of your colleagues here that I'm not an engineer, and it always feels like those become sort of a little engineering. So you may look at poles a little bit differently after I explain what you're looking at. But I do want to thank the board and let you know, and in further in my presentation of sorts, let you know that we are working to resolve those. But I thought first we'd take a step back and talk a little bit about what is a double pole and how they're created. So in general, if that sounds like a good idea to folks, double pole is typically created. So just kind of level set, the town of Harwich, not all towns have ownership by one utility. So the towns of Harwich, all the poles are owned and maintained by Verizon. Other towns on the Cape are owned and maintained by Eversource. But as all the utilities have a responsibility with regard to the poles, and have a responsibility with regard to the infrastructure that's on the pole. And when you're looking at a pole, the highest wires on the top of the pole, and it, depending on whether it's a single phase or 2 phases, you're either going to see one wire and then another one right below it. That's your electrical space, so that's Eversource. Anything in between that's in the middle of the pole, and it's really distinct when you look at it, is the communication space, and that's typically Comcast. It can be a third-party attachee. I believe Open Cape is in that space as well. And then the bottom, the lowest wires are Verizon. So if, for example, the wires are sagging at the bottom, that's a call to Verizon because they need to, straighten it, switch them up, straighten them up, and the same goes for any other space that you're looking at. Why does that come into place here? Why am I mentioning that? So a double pole is typically created for a number of reasons. It can be a project that's coming through town and you want to do an upgrade. It could be Eversource that's doing the upgrade. It could be Verizon. And there's a need for upgrading the existing poles. Verizon will come and set a set of poles, depending on the project, each one next to the old one, and then one by one, there is an order that the utilities have to remove their infrastructure from the old pole and put it on the new pole. And that is done in a very systematic way through a database called Engines. And I had to write this down because I couldn't remember what Engines stood for. It's an acronym for, I'm going to try not to look at my notes, National Joint Utility Notification System, Engines. And everybody who has infrastructure on the pole has access, or on the poles has access to that database, even towns. So the only caveat is that towns that may have, say, fire or police communications in that communication space, they can only see where they have infrastructure they can only see the poles that they have infrastructure on, if that makes sense. And so it's a double pole database. I believe the list that I saw that was attached to the letter may have been retrieved from Engines. But it was a PDF, so it was hard to tell. They're typically downloaded in Excel. And the reason I'm telling you this is that it's done from the top down. So until everybody removes their facilities from the old to the new pole, and the old pole is taken out, that double pole remains. Does that make sense? And it's a safety issue trying to remove yours before the utility above you. And it's a standard rule that nobody touches anybody else's infrastructure. So Eversource is not going to transfer Verizon's. Certainly, I think everybody agrees that you don't want to touch the electrical space at all. But even oftentimes we're asked, well, why don't you just transfer over Comcast? So we just don't do that. So that's sort of level setting. And as you can imagine, it takes time. So every time a utility transfers, they put it into Engines, they report it into Engines, and it goes into the next utilities bucket, if you will. And so I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions. The reason I mention that is because I think it really helps to understand, because people look at double poles. I should mention there's one other reason there's double poles. It's car accidents. So people, and you're nodding your heads because I know you've had, I'm aware of some that have happened just from talking to your public safety officials. I met with Chief LeBlanc recently on a different topic, and we happened to talk about some things that have happened either this past summer or this fall. So unfortunately, people hit poles, and then oftentimes, most of the time, it's in a condition. If it's in a condition that it has to be replaced, Verizon will come out, we will come out, and we will transfer to the new pole. They'll set a new pole. We'll transfer the electrical at the top. But if we don't have the other utilities right there at that emergency, that's going to sit until they can get out there and start to move their infrastructure. So I'm going to pause because I can see the chairman has a question, or maybe.
And tornadoes.
And tornadoes? What about tornadoes?
That's why we have some double poles. Quite a few, actually.
Could be, and that could be. That I see where you're getting. So some of these have been there since the tornadoes.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Questions from the board, Don, so far?
No, you just took my question.
Mary?
I'll fess up, I'm a Verizon retiree, so, in the construction world, so well aware of the process. But the part I think we're more interested in, what's the time frame once that new pole is in to start moving them along? We look like we have quite a few, and they've been there for quite a while.
Yeah, so I don't have a short answer to the timeline because unfortunately, tornadoes is a perfect example of a storm that came out of nowhere, and that we're all, that's an extreme example. But unfortunately, the double poles are not, I'm going to be honest, they're not the top of the list. So the top of the list for the utility is reliability and keeping the lights on. Certainly during the last 2 years, it's been even more important to keep the lights on because everybody was home. Most everybody was home, working from home. So reliability is the top, storm response, capital projects that are surrounding reliability and other, critical work that the utility is doing. And the double poles tend to, if I'm being honest, I don't want to say that they're last on the list, but they're not at the top of the list. That being said, and it's probably the case for Verizon and for Comcast, because again, it's a joint, all we do is start the process. So I've had boards say, well, then are you saying it's somebody else's fault? Not at all. I'm just saying we're all part of that process. We have to work together. The list that I saw, it's hard for me to tell. Those are existing double poles, but I don't know until we run where we are. So there could be X amount of double poles in the town. It's important to know where we are in the queue, if you will. So if half those poles we've already transferred, then we have to help you to help nudge the other utilities to keep them moving it along, if that makes sense. But I will say overarching to all of this discussion, and I mentioned this to Joe as well, and to your public safety officials ahead in that recent conversation with Chief LeBlanc, that we'd like to work together to look at the ones that are either the biggest pain point for the town, the ones that have been there since the tornadoes, the ones that are an eyesore, whatever the real heartburn is, if you will, like what's keeping you up at night that bother you or your your public safety officials first, I think, and then potentially some of the residents that have reported this to you. We'd like to work together to kind of chip at them one by one. And what I've asked is that operations, though they're not here with me tonight, and I know they're busy, I gave them the invitation if they'd like to come, but I said I can handle this alone. I just want a commitment from you. What are we gonna do? I'm having them download the list of where we are to start, because we can't, that's where we can help the most, not so much where Verizon is or where Comcast is or a third-party attachee. But I'd like to start chipping away at those. And so while tonight I don't have an exact time frame for you, I'd like to start to work with you, or with your permission, with your town staff, to see which ones are the ones, where do we start? And go to those first, if that makes sense.
That's great, because that's what we were hoping to get, is some type of would you have a counterpart at both Comcast and Verizon, similar to you, so we could?
So I have a
All with them?
Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting it, Ms. Anderson. I have a counterpart at Verizon that I can, I assume that a letter was sent, similar letter to Verizon as well, of support, or I don't know.
I believe so.
Okay.
I'll check with staff.
Yeah, I believe the direction from the board was both.
Okay. And I don't know who you sent it to, but I do have a similar counterpart. They have a little bit of a different structure, but I have someone I can definitely call upon. And then I do have some contacts at Comcast that I can help to work with. Now, just keep in mind that there are other attachees, and those are, I couldn't say who they are because those are within Engines. But it really can be, if there's Open Cape, I don't know if there is in town. I do have someone I can speak to at Open Cape as well. And then just start to work slowly together on that. I will say it's tough to say that you can eliminate them, because there's always going to be projects that are going to come down the line. And it's actually good, because you get newer poles. And there's unfortunately always going to be, I'd rather say they're not going to be, but I anticipate there's going to be poles that are hit, or storms, or incidents that create situations where you have to have a double pole again.
Thank you. Julie, any questions?
So your timing is unbelievable, because I'm currently dealing with a telephone pole relocation for work, and it's been 2 years. It's been a painful process. But to Mary's point, the time it takes to replace the two poles, I think, is important, because in some areas, the two poles would represent, blind spots, et cetera. I do have a question. What are the brown sort of metal? Are they just braces on those poles in certain spots?
Just to answer two, yes. So typically they're either, they're braced together. Sometimes you'll also see a pole where we've already transferred our facilities and they chop the top. So you only see part of a pole. That's not, just a hobby. I mean, that's typically the standard of how they do it. And then the pole becomes smaller. I will say that the timing is really dependent on each pole individually. We have to see where it is in Engines. So if we're, if none of them if we haven't transferred any of those that I saw the list, then we definitely have our work cut out for us. If there's a percentage that are in the middle space or in the Verizon, then, we can help to try to nudge the other. We can't really order them, but we can say, we're really looking to partner with you guys to try to chip away at this. So I don't know the total timing. It really depends, because sometimes whether we get really busy with storms or Verizon gets busy with something else, or Comcast, alike, it can be halted in the middle. That's why I'm saying each pole is different, and you have to look to see, not only in Engines, but if you were, not that I'm saying I don't encourage driving around and looking at poles, because you really should be. Although it happens, the more you work for the utility, you start to look around and see things you didn't look at before. We have to go one by one and see where we're at. I think the best thing, and I know that the area manager, Brian, is going to ask one of the clerks if he hasn't already. I spoke to him late last week and told him that I would be at this meeting today. He was going to have them run our list. So the list that's in our bucket. And there's an acknowledgement that we need to get on it. He said, it's on my list.
Yeah, and I think that's, that kind of relates to the question that Mary's raised in terms of timing, because I know from the project I've worked on, I'm driving that schedule, I'm keeping on top of it. And like you say, it's 4 different things, it's Eversource, it's Verizon, it's Comcast, and then Verizon again, after the telephone pole and electrical issues have been taken care of, they have to come back at the end. And the electrical contractors that you use, and not just you, but all of those companies. So it becomes this extended process. And I imagine from the town's perspective, I don't necessarily know that we have somebody in that seat keeping on top of the companies. Do we?
Well, I know it's been a priority of the DBW, certainly Chris Nickerson, our roads manager,
Yeah.
is keenly aware of it. But again, we have a
It's a
representative from
yeah.
Eversource. It behooves us to get in front of all the other companies as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's excellent, because I really do think, and I'm sure Chris is crazy busy, and it's almost a full-time job as you're trying to coordinate through the companies, and I think it's imperative that we move more quickly. So thank you for being here.
Sure, and I'll just mention that, and again, one of the other reasons that I think something like double poles has, I don't want to say fallen to the bottom of the list, because it's not the bottom, but it's not the top. I think just the pressures of the last 2 years since the tornadoes, it didn't happen, it was 6 months later that we all went into quarantine. And I think reliability, I think storms, these are the same guys that are doing that work. We've had some really severe weather patterns. And even if it doesn't specifically hit Harwich, we've been staging, I think Chief Guillemette can attest, we've been staging a lot more crews. There's just a lot more focus on storm response from the utility and getting crews across the bridge in advance, staging them at the Cape Cod Mall, staging them at, in the Outer Cape and Truro, things that we, may or may not have done historically. And so again, that sort of pushes, along with new customer connections and people doing upgrades because they want it to be here year round. And I'm sure you've felt this for the past year. So all of that kind of has a ripple effect on what we do that may not really be noticed, other than maybe seeing a truck drive by to do some work on an existing service.
Thank you.
But they're the same. Those are the same linemen that are doing that work that's needed.
Right.
So.
And they do a great job, so I don't mean to imply
Understood.
that they
Yeah.
don't,
No,
it's just timing.
I think it's, I will say the only other town thus far that's really brought this to my attention on the Cape is Falmouth. And I did the same sort of education. And I know that it's a goal, oftentimes we start to chip away at it and then we lose a little sight and we just kind of got to get back. And it's helpful that the towns give us that, pull the reins a little bit, because I think it reminds us we need to get on it as well.
Thank you.
So,
Nothing further. Thanks for being here.
sure thing.
Don?
Just want to double back to one last thing. Not suggesting we do this, but I'm not sure that any of my colleagues here know this, but in 2004 we had the same kind of problem. And by the way, we always have weather. So it's
Right.
not like something that you can't plan for because you have to. We got to the point of actually threatening to not approve any new polls in the town, and it was miraculous how quickly the backlog started going away. I don't know what to say other than Mary's right. You drive around town, these things didn't just happen in the last month or two. There's just voluminous numbers of these things that have been around for months, if not years. I would
Understood.
hope that you could do something like an accounts agent would do in a company and start aging these things on the list and start realizing exactly, how many days out they are from the time they were reported as being broken and impaired.
So in engines, it does. You bring up a good point. I've worked with cities actually on double poles when I covered a different region before I was on the Cape, and they do have the year. So if the year of installation of the double pole. So if there's one that is, again, it all depends on, it's either safety or, like I said, the ones that really give you. If you want us to target the oldest ones, we can target the oldest ones. I mean, we can work with you on the ones that are the town's priority.
I would just say that working with the public safety people is the most important, at least for me. And just that you're here is an acknowledgement that there is a problem. This was born from residents calling about double poles in front of their houses, which I reached out to the DPW director that explained that Chris Nickerson has tried ad nauseum to get all of the double poles replaced. And I think the number is in the hundreds now. So your acknowledgement is great, and you getting us a list to move off of what you've already done, so we can also put pressure on the other utilities would be great. But it sounds like we're on the right track.
Yeah, and I can, as a next step, I can, with your permission, I can either work directly with Joe or with Lincoln and Chris Nickerson, whom I've met again via Zoom. We've approached it differently with each town. We could sit with them and say, these are the ones we're looking to do. How does that work for you? We chop them off the list, knock them off the list and continue to charge forward.
With no objection from the board, I think that's the right
Yes.
direction, is to work with the town administrator and staff, not us.
Great,
Definitely.
great. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.
Joe, B is on you.
Thank you. So, through the board to the general public, we're just advising everybody that the annual liquor license renewal process is about to begin. Danielle Delaney, our executive assistant for licensing matters, has met virtually with the ABCC, been given her directives, and in turn will be advising all of the establishments. So the ABCC has reaffirmed that the applications for renewal that go out to anyone that presently has one should be done by the establishment within the month of November. October is too early, and December is definitely too late. So we'll have material to that. I had a meeting this afternoon with department heads just to remind them of the process, and if they had any input on that, to certainly be mindful, so that the board knows that we will begin that process on your end in early December. And so that notices are going out from the town shortly to the establishments, again, for them to work on it in the month of November.
Thank you. Joe, how do the establishments get notified? We did have one case last year where, through the pandemic, he claimed that he was not notified. I think it's their responsibility to know, but how do we notify them?
So this year, what we've done is we're sending a pre-notice notice for them to be aware that they're going to be getting a packet from the town, and that they should expect to see it before November, and then they should get it by November. The establishments do bear the responsibility. It's their annual renewal, and the timing has never changed, meaning the town always releases it sometime in October to be done by the applicant in November, to be voted by the board in December. So we're using this vehicle tonight to let everybody know it's happening. We're doing mailings to let them know it's coming out, but the establishments bear the burden of also looking for them.
Thank you.
Is it,
Go ahead, Mary.
is it email or US mail? How do they get this?
So we do everything by US mail because it's required by the ABCC to be done by US mail.
Thank you.
And Joe, is there any opportunity now to do the entertainment licenses at the same time, or do we have to wait on the entertainment licenses? Seems we do them both differently.
We can try to set it up that the liquor license and the entertainment license are done at the same time. All annual licenses are expected to be renewed through the December process ahead of January 1st.
Okay,
So I can work with staff on that if you'd like.
thank you. Questions from the board, Larry?
No, that'd be a good approach, do them all at one time, so we can move through them in a reasonable way.
Julie?
Joe, one other, Michael, if I may. Because some establishments close during the winter, Joe, is it possible to email in addition to sending US mail?
I'll check with Danielle. I know that she has an email list, and we're in constant contact with the establishments. You know, we should be made aware of any forwarding information, if you will, on that stuff.
Okay.
But, well, I'll work with staff to make sure we're reaching out to the establishments.
Julie?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, having them in one uniform packet is better than piecemeal, and I think the sooner the better, I should say, in early December, so thank you.
Mary?
I'm all set.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think owing to what we learned last year, which is way more than we ever wanted to know about liquor license issuances or denials, it makes sense to put them all together because apparently the entertainment licenses are an adjunct to the liquor licenses, and it would be better to see the entire mosaic for each company.
Message received?
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you. Okay, next up is the potential 2022 annual town meeting article regarding changing the Board of Selectmen to Select Board, as many other towns have done. Joe?
Knowing that the board had contemplated this potential article, what you should have in your packet is an unadorned Word document, but this was worked on by council previously, so I would suggest that it's in pretty good shape to help direct the board's discussion this evening.
Thank you. And really what I'd be looking for is a vote of the board to do this, and then send it to charter review to make the charter changes that need to happen. We've talked about this for at least 3 years, and each time it's come up, we've talked about the cost of changing it and getting it before the charter review, but it's usually 2 to 3 weeks before town meeting. So this is an attempt at not doing that. So if the board wants to change this, let's make that motion tonight and get it to charter review and legal to put it together. And I'll start with Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in favor of proceeding with this. It's pretty clear that everybody wants to do it. The only thing that I will say is we made it abundantly clear to KP Law in these discussions, since they were the ones who brought up how expensive it was to convert bylaws and references, that it was an expensive billing process. I had that conversation with John Giorgio personally at the MMA a few years ago. They need to give us that number. I mean, what are we looking at? It can't be unique because other towns have done it. I mean, there's got to be a way of doing this, and it's got to be quantifiable. We're nowhere near the beginning of this.
I do have some information from KP Law on changes that they've done in other towns, as well as some information on other towns, and it appears to be between $2,000 and $7,000. That's the homework we've gotten so far, but one document out of KP Law was, I think, $3,500 for one town that they did in it, so not a lot of money.
Okay.
Mary?
I'm in favor. It's the future. I mean, I'm an aardvark and I've been a chairman, and being a selectman doesn't bother me, but it's the future.
Julie?
I said, during my forum discussions that maybe we could change it to select women, but I guess that's not going over well, so I'll go with select board. I'm in favor.
Not a bad idea.
For 100 years,
as you
right,
know,
Julie?
For 100 years, we'll just give it a whirl.
I've been pushing for this for some time. I just noticing, Michael, just looking around, 9 other towns on the Cape have already made this move. And, it's time. We should bring it to the voters and get and let them consider it.
Thank you. Joe?
So if the board's contemplating that, I would just remind everybody that it would be the two-step process traditionally, meaning the article in some form would come before a town meeting in 202 days. I got that one snuck in tonight. At the annual town meeting, and then if adopted at that town meeting, would appear at the next annual town election. So a year later, at the third Tuesday in May, it would go before the voters, and both votes are needed to amend the charter.
Thank you. Don?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we refer this to the Charter and Bylaw Committee for their review and markup of it,
With the board's support.
with the board's support.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No, this move.
Anyone in the audience? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
Next up, discussion and possible vote to update the following committee charges: Bikeways Committee charge and Traffic Safety Committee charge. This is part of a process on reviewing lots of committees, and our staff doing tremendous work on organizing what has been very unorganized. In reviewing the Traffic Safety Committee and the Bikeways Committee, the charges are fairly aligned. It's not really regulated or not really specific. Traffic safety also says 5 or 7 people, which I think at very least the board should decide if it's going to be 5 people or 7 people. But if you read the charges, and I will say from my own experience, the complaints I get related to bike trails are that of the intersections and the crossings. So I will open this up conversation from the board, and I'll start with Larry.
Well, my first comment would be I like 5 better than 7, just because it's more workable size. Pardon? And you're correct. I know Don and I interviewed a couple of people for bikeways, and certainly the safety becomes the number one issue. And in fact, we talked one time about if not having a liaison to the bike committee from police, at least they have a contact that they can talk to, because a lot of the same issues come up. So we have some traffic safety folks here tonight, but it makes sense for me to combine these. What we do need to do is, and I don't think we have yet, is talk to the committees, the Bikeways Committee, and be sure they're get their input into this.
Yeah, and I'm the liaison to both, so I'm happy to have those conversations, but I think that, sorry, I didn't mean
Go
to
ahead,
just
no,
jump in.
dive right in.
That's
But
okay, Julie.
I do think, yeah, I don't, no, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
No, I do think it makes sense, and I'd like to hear the feedback from both committees in terms of what their thoughts are on that as well. And I actually was just trying to organize all the different meetings and the different Tuesdays and Wednesdays to get to some of these meetings. And I would like to do that in the next few weeks so that and I know you want to take some action on, the discussion, but I think we should get the feedback from the committees as well.
Great. Mary?
I read through everything in the packet, but I wasn't sure, nothing was dated today. I wasn't sure what we're trying to do here.
The biggest question for me, for the board, is do you think that the traffic and bikeways should be merged?
That's what I just gathered from Julie.
And then whether or not we should up the number of people to 5 to 7, or pick a definitive number of what it's gonna be. But if the charges are alike and the work is alike, and we can merge them, it would be an opportunity to merge them.
Okay.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In fairness, and Larry knows this, this was brought up from the former chair of the Bikeways Committee, who suggested that it might be a good idea to fold that into the Public Safety Committee. It wasn't an idea that was just to blend them together. It was that he thought it would be wiser in terms of the connection with the police and in terms of actions that need to be taken to fold that committee into the Traffic Safety Committee. We didn't come up with it on our own.
Any comments, Don, as far as what you think about doing it?
I think that about 80 to 90% of the Bikeways Committee could be taken up under the jurisdiction of the Traffic Safety Committee, and that the remaining part of that may wind up being appropriate for Trails Committee, because we have so many committees.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Michael. Linda Sabula for the Traffic Safety Committee. I do have to say we were a bit taken aback by seeing this on the agenda because we didn't know what we had done wrong. All of a sudden, we're being called before the board, and it's like, what's going on? But appreciate the thought. I don't think our committee has ever discussed having the bikeways or anything else merged with us. I don't think we'd have any particular objection, because traffic safety is really traffic safety, which is pedestrians, bicycles, crosswalks, blah, 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 blah. So I don't think we'd have we're not going to get pitchforks out over this. I think that if the board, if that's your pleasure, we'd be fine with it, with a different charge, increasing the size a little bit, because we have, the way it reads is there's supposed to be 3 from the town administrator, and we have 2, and because, of course, Griffin left, and we are supposed to have 3 or 5, 2 or 4 from the selectmen, and we have 3. So if you wanted to add a couple more to get some people from the Bikeways Committee onto this Traffic Safety Committee, we're not going to disagree, and it's probably a good idea to see if we can do some consolidation. The Bikeways Committee does talk to us, when they are going to be putting an article in for some kind of crossing light or bike crossing improvements, to ask us if we will support it. And so we have worked with them before on a very good level. So we're certainly, if that's the board's pleasure, dandy with us.
Thank you, Linda. Do we want to leave this with Julie as the liaison to meet with both committees and then come back with a combined charge?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Staff, I know Ellen has been doing a phenomenal job of organizing committee members and files, so.
Yeah, no,
If
she
you would
has.
do that and then
Yeah.
tell me when you want it brought back, I think
Sure.
that's a good direction.
You can start
I
with
just-
Fran on the bikeways.
Fran, yeah.
Yeah.
I just have one comment, if I may, is that I think from the Bikeways Committee, probably the issue that they'd be most sensitive about is being sure the charge leads them to still be advocates for bikeways. We talk about safety, but they'll want to somehow voice, so they advocate for their interests.
Mary?
And one other thing, I'd want to make sure we didn't kick anybody off bikeways. Make sure, however many of them we have, end up with a chair on this.
I hate to say it, but we might have to kick
Might
people
have to,
off.
yeah.
But there is a kind of last on, and we just did some appointments, but we also have the ability to add alternates if we decide to add alternates.
We're a victim of our own success. They're actually all loaded up.
Yeah, and there has been, this is not the first time this has happened in the town. I know Recreation and Youth merged years ago, and the
Okay.
chairs of each committee decided who was gonna stay on the committee, and it was by consensus. And I think if it turns into an argument, then we can have a further conversation about numbers. But I think this is an opportunity to merge two committees together that really do a lot of the same work. And I would just say to the two traffic safety people we have in the audience, you guys are doing great work. I know a lot of these very dangerous intersections we've been talking about for a long time are getting some momentum in solving some of the problems, so. And I have great faith in Linda on the bike crossings to finally figure out how we can get bikes to just stop darting across the road. All of the blinking stoplights and everything else that say stop does not work. So we do have to, at some point, deal with public safety, but we've given the chief an awful lot lately. But bikes don't stop going across a bike trail. And cars now slam on their brakes as soon as the little yellow light goes on and look both ways, and somebody could have passed 5 minutes before, but the light's still going off. But I can't tell you how many rear-end accidents I've almost seen on Queen Anne Road from that crossing, but something has to be done about the bike crossings at some point. Linda?
If I may take this opportunity from the Traffic Safety Committee to thank the Board of Selectmen for accepting the gift from the Winchmere Club, which got all of that work done at Freeman, Snow Inn, and Route 28. We have had wonderful results. We have all of that now is surveyed out with little iron rebar in the ground, so it will be found, so the stakes don't disappear. And our DPW has done some cutting back, and we hope to have some more cutting back, because that Snow Inn onto 28 is a really dangerous intersection. And the town right-of-way goes way back on the other. If you're looking for the rebar, you have to go to the other side of the bushes. But we appreciate that you accepted that gift and that you've also worked with us as well, and that's been great.
Well, and thank Witchmere at the same time, because that was a very generous donation from Witchmere. Any follow-up from the board, or?
No.
All set? Mary?
Nope.
Don, you good?
I'm good.
Okay. So Julie, you have some homework.
Yep.
All right, next up, discussion and possible vote on the Harwich Energy Committee. Vote to rename the Harwich Energy Committee to the Harwich Energy and Climate Committee. Vote to amend the committee charge to reflect the realignment of the committee. So 1 and 2 are really the same. There was a resolution at town meeting 2 years ago asking us to put a committee together on climate change. Last week, I believe it was last week, I showed you an example of what Chatham did, which was to merge it with their energy committee. If you look at the charge of our energy committee, there's certainly, there's things in there that match, and this would be additional work for that committee. So I got comments back from Mary, and I got a slightly different charge than we presented from Larry, which you all have in front of you. So I will open this up for conversation, and I just think it's time to move on it. I'm not sure that we need to form a new committee to get started. That we could utilize a current committee and give them an additional charge for homework back to the board. Mary, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. Like you just said, it makes sense when you look at the charges. It seems like they'd be tripping over one another if we had two. Again, my only question was, it's page 43 and 44 of the packet, Climate Action Committee. Is that our proposal of what we would have, or?
That
is-
was the proposal that Ed McManus gave at his last meeting.
Well, that's further. That's the one that's
Up further, yeah.
a letter,
That's, I think, the U.S. Mayor's Climate
Yeah.
Protection Agreement.
Let me get into the
I don't
packet.
know,
And you said 43, Climate Action
43 and
Committee.
44, so I wasn't sure if that was
His
our
were 40 and
proposal.
41. His is 40, and then the follow-up is 41 for the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection. Right.
So the only one, Mary, that we had last week that we contemplated was the one in the packet that was from the
That was
town
from-
of Chatham.
Okay, so I don't know what this one is, because it's written like it's Harwich. But it's not written like we're combining them, because it tells the climate committee is to coordinate with the utilities and energy.
I do believe that was, the other stuff in the packet was Ed's backup, but I
Okay,
believe that was the
okay.
charge that he proposed.
Okay,
And-
So-
And what we're looking at is much simpler.
Page
Yep.
45.
page 45 is our proposal?
Mhm.
Well, it's Chatham,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
And
Yeah.
you all have in front of you an abbreviated version of that, that Larry took the time to put together, and it's called the Harwich Utility and Climate Action Commission. It's a fairly simple one-pager that was in front of you tonight. Mary, that takes into account some of what you had said
Yeah.
and changing wording, but this really is a bullet point proposal on what they should start with.
That's
And then,
perfect.
and then come back to the board. I think that that's a very simple document and a very simple charge, and I
Yeah.
think it spells out what they're currently doing and what we want them to start on to bring back
Yeah.
to the board.
Yeah.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a note, Larry, commissions are derivative from above, from Mass General Law. Conservation Commission, they're codified in state legislation. I mean, you can call it this, but it's going to wind up being a Climate Action Committee.
And I'm okay with committee. What I did was to take the existing title, utility and energy, and so I left the title commission that because that was what was there now. And then I tried to get the dot points and main things, both in Chatham's and some comments from Ed, but simplifies. We have leave them much freedom to do their job. I am not married to a commission. I'm more than happy to go with committee. I just want to keep it simple, give them broad latitude, and I wanted to also reinforce that they're advisory to the Board of Selectmen.
That's kind of why I brought it up.
That was the points I wanted to get through with this.
Because commissions, we don't have authority to change their actions. Committees are advisory to the board.
I'm perfectly willing to go with committee.
And do we want to go to 5 or 7?
So, when I look at this, I definitely think that we can certainly combine it. I get the initiative, and I think it's smart. But I do struggle with it a little bit because having been the liaison to the Energy Committee and, having had Larry Cole and his expertise. Now, I haven't been back recently, obviously, because I haven't been here, so I certainly want to reconnect with the Energy Committee. The only struggle I have, though, is that, 5 or 7, I think the scope and of this whole committee is fairly large. When you read through all this material, you're talking about going from, climate change and energy assessments that are already done by, or facilitated through the town administrator's office to do energy audits through the engineer, et cetera. And those are looking at better ways to, reduce costs, get upgraded equipment and all of these things, which I think falls within this scope. But then you're looking at, we're talking flood zone issues and, and increasing the overall infrastructure of the town. So when I look at this, although I think it can be combined, I think that there's a certain level of expertise that you're gonna need on this committee. And that's where I'm struggling with this decision. Because, you couldn't have a committee like this combined without somebody, let's just say I'm going to throw it out, like you're going to have an engineer, you're going to need an engineer, right? And townwide, but you're also probably going to need a committee member from the public to be willing to put in some time on this. You're going to need an energy efficiency person who, like Larry, who had great expertise. Again, I don't know what the current makeup is on the committee. So that's the only place I struggle. I don't think it can't be done, but I think it may require a little more in-depth examination of, and I think it has to be 7 people then if you're going to cover this kind of a scope in one
I
committee.
would only, if I may have
Go ahead,
two
Larry.
comments. I have no problem with 7, my inclination is to be smaller so there's better discussion. I would comment that the makeup of the committee itself is up to us to appoint them. So we could take that, we could still approve this, and we could have, or we could make an motion that appointed by the Board of Selectmen with expertise. I don't see that as being part of the charge per se. It's more of the appointment process.
Yeah, I guess the only other comment then I would have, and I don't disagree with you, and dealing with 5 people versus 7 is always, I think, easier. But on the same token, I don't really want to, I hate the thought of pushing people out that are willing to volunteer too. And again, to Michael's point, sometimes it needs to be done. So I'm not saying I'm adverse to it. I'm just saying there's a lot of pieces to consider. Again, can it be done? Yeah, I just think we need to be pretty innovative in the way we think we're going to take on this, make a new committee, combine these two, and make it effective,
And I would only comment, Julie, there's a lot of information in this packet. And Ed McManus's proposal to the board at his last meeting was a tall ask. It even offered a budget. That's not what we're gonna vote on.
Right, yeah, no, I
So what
understand.
we're gonna vote on, and I would say seven would be what I
Okay
would
with that.
ask for, so that the interview committee can specifically handpick people. But they're not gonna be dealing with floodplains right now. They're not gonna be dealing
Right.
with any of that. They're only gonna be bringing back
Yeah,
what they think they need.
right,
And one of the questions that we're gonna ask all the committees this year is, what do you need to be successful? What parts of your charge do you think you need changed? So as they present to us, rather than just get a recap on what they've done for the past year, and in this case, this year, not much because of the pandemic,
Right.
we're gonna ask them what they need and what they would like to see changed in their charters, so that we can look at that. So that's part of the new question here. This is a very basic start for them to then absorb what Ed presented, absorb what's flying around on the internet, and then come back to us with reasonable requests of what they can do or not do.
right, okay,
And
yeah.
experts that they need or not need.
I'm comfortable with that, and I think it can be achieved. I just, to your point, reading through that packet, I
Yeah.
felt, wow, that's
Well, it's a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of
A
debate.
motion?
yeah,
No.
there's a lot.
So what I'd recommend is that we'll clean this up, add the 7 members to it,
And committee,
and
and bring it back for.
add committee to it, 7 members, and then I'm gonna, and its residents, including but not limited to, I'm gonna add but not limited to the charges that we have here. So that it can broaden it a little bit. Don?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make mention, because we've been beating this up in the conversation, we're not combining anything. We only have the one committee. This is
Right.
additive.
No, I know, this is
So
new.
if
This
it
is-
doesn't work out, we could always spin it off and do something different, but this is additive. It's something that we are not currently doing, and it
Oh,
presents a
right, right.
platform.
No, I think it's a good initiative, totally. I
So
just think it's
I'll put it on the next
broad.
agenda for vote, but I'm not gonna put all the backup material in the packet, so we're not confused. There'll
Bless
only
you.
be a 1-page new charge, and I will ask Ellen just to add the comments from the board and clean this up a little bit. And great job, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's back on for next week. Okay. F, Joe, we'll go to you on that, which is approve the revised Monomoy Regional Agreement language as presented, and request an article be on the annual town meeting warrant.
Thank you. You should all have in front of you additional packet material, and I apologize that that was not in the original packet over the weekend. And I'll walk you through it, and we'll have that in the updated version online. Excuse me, but the first page, if you know, for you to know that you're looking at the right packet, says revised regional agreement language, and then it says potential vote. So what this is an extract from the Monomoy Regional School District School Committee meeting that was held on August 11th of this year. And so that shows you that the school committee voted unanimously with all members passing the proposed changes. And you can see in that excerpt that there's a reference to the approving the revised regional agreement language as presented. And so that was the part that we were missing from staff. We received the first page from the school district, but we didn't get the second part, and that's what I want to walk you through this evening. So the second part of that is several pages. It starts with page number 1. The page numbering does not continue throughout, however. What you'll see in the first numbered pages, which are pages 1 through 5, is a recap of the changes that were proposed by Dr. Carpenter and his administrative team that was endorsed by the school committee and presumably would go forward to both towns at our annual meetings in the spring with warrant articles. So first, on that first page of changes, you can see the color coding that was used. Anything that was in blue was feedback that administration had received, according to this, that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE, had originally suggested a year ago with this effort, that the district would want to make. So any changes in blue were being recommended by prior conversations with DESE. And as you may know, DESE is going to be the agency that the two towns send the amended agreement to for their overall approval. Then you can see that anything that was highlighted in yellow is administrative proposals regarding budget, capital, and debt, and ultimately the assessment. And then there is one reference in there where there was an obsolete provision that's being taken out, and that's highlighted in orange. And so pages 1 through 5 give you the narrative of the changes that are being proposed to the agreement. And then the following pages are what we would consider to be the red line change to the agreement itself. So it's the entirety of the regional agreement document reflecting the red line changes that the narrative on the preceding 5 pages discusses. So certainly there's quite a bit of information to go through, but I also want to go back to the excerpt for a second, because what you have from there, as with your minutes, is a brief recap of some of the discussion, and indicates that one of the members, it's the last reference under the paragraph in the excerpt that says potential vote, and Joseph Osceola spoke on the importance of moving forward on the proposed changes to correct the financial inequity of the member town's assessment costs and providing fiscal relief to Harwich, who bears the brunt of the fiscal inequity. And then it was moved, seconded, and like I said before, unanimously endorsed. So it's understood that the proposals are meant to certainly create equity with the two towns, but also try to resolve some of the issues that we in Harwich have been feeling with the financial impact being greater for Harwich. So that's what I offer this evening, Mr. Chairman, for you and the members of the board to be aware of and consider as you discuss this matter.
Thank you. Don?
I don't want to start us off on a bad footing here, but there have been several times where the agreement has changed and a couple of things were buried in it, and I really don't feel prepared with something I just got right before the meeting to go through it and actually read everything. So I don't have anything to say.
Mary?
I think I'm with Don. I'd like some time to digest this. I was on that subcommittee, and I'm assuming this is the same document that I saw on that subcommittee, but I don't know that. I still think, I'm assuming that this is okay and that we'll go forward with it, but it still only addresses the elementary school and doesn't do anything about the other conversation that subcommittee had about using a formula that takes, some type of formula that takes assessed value in each town and would then further sway the budget for the middle school and the high school. Because as Don pointed out many months ago, this problem is just moving to each building. So I'd still like to pursue that, but this has to get approved first, but I'd like to wait a week on this.
Julie?
I agree. I'd like more time to look at it.
Larry?
Yeah, I'd like to read it.
We'll bring this back. I think You may.
Hi, my name's John Shorey, and I always have trouble speaking for myself or as chairman of the Finance Committee. I guess for myself is what I'm speaking for right here.
Without a vote of the committee, you're speaking for yourself.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you, Mike, for that. That helps me understand these things. I agree with the board 100%. You know, to me, this regional agreement that's, we're looking at, now I'll be brief, I'll try to be brief. This regional agreement is akin almost to the comprehensive water plan, Dan. I mean, it's a big document with lots of terminology, lots of acronyms, lots of formulas, and to understand it is very difficult for me. I spent a lot of time the last 3 or 4 days, because I look at your agendas on Friday and see if there's something that's important for me to be here. I saw this and I said, I haven't heard too much about this other than I know something, the working group's going on about it. So I tried to dig into it. I started getting documents, and I must have 6 separate documents. Red line documents, the document that Joe referenced tonight, which I did not see in the packet at all. Even today, before I came here, I checked.
We just got it. We
Yeah.
just got it tonight.
Yeah, and I didn't see that, but I had a copy of the document previously. So the people in the public watching this had no access to that document. They don't know what you're talking about. I agree, we should delay this and speak about it later, like what you're going to do. But to Mary's point, and to Don's point, which he's been hammering away at, is this is just a very, very short-term solution to a very long-term issue. And to look at that, you have to look at more than just what's in this proposed document. They reference, I don't think they did reference it in this document, but some of the documents I saw reference not only taking on the operating expenses of elementary schools, but looking further beyond that, which is the equal evaluation, which was briefly mentioned, which is basically the wealth of a town, how much money the town is valued, is considered and taken into consideration in 2 other regional school districts within the state, Mount Greylock and Essex, Manchester. They both look at that as a key component to assessing assessments. Another one is town populations. Some towns are bigger, some towns are smaller. That is a key ingredient into the formula. And another one is the town population. It's the student enrollment, which is the only thing our current agreement looks at is student enrollment. And that's why Harwich is so high, Chatham's is so low. They do look briefly at values of the town, but we've hit that ceiling many times, long time ago. So I think this, and if you did, one of the documents I did see was how much money we could potentially save, if that's the correct word, that Harwich will not be paying in a current assessment if we ran the current document that's in front of you. If we ran the budget through the model that they're proposing, we save, our assessment is lowered. We don't really save anything, but our assessment is lowered by $612,000. We pay less, Chatham pays more. That looks very good on paper initially. Hey, we're making less than $612,000 less of our assessment. Chatham's paying more. That's good. But if you run the equalized valuation formulas, the town population formulas, and the student enrollment formulas, and then you get into minimum contributions, you get into foundation budget. Again, it's like the wastewater. There's these terms. The potential savings is $3.5 million if you use that formula that Greylock uses. They use the equalized values of the town, and so doesn't Essex, Manchester use those equalized values of the town. That's a lot bigger number. I don't know how Chatham would respond to something like that.
I can tell you.
Yeah. And I'd like to hear from possibly Mary, if it's appropriate, and Joe, if that was proposed in this working group that you were members of, and not just looking at the short-term $612,000, but looking at the long term of using these other ways of forming. This precedent has been set. 2 other regional school districts are doing this, of equal evaluation, student enrollment, and town population. And that's my only thing. And I didn't, again, see this in the packet tonight, which I was.
That's why we're gonna bring it back.
So thank you.
Joe, I would ask that, you know, a big piece of this for me is the 612,000. And last year, we were able to get that from the town of Chatham, and we were able to stop some of the bleeding in our budget. So it's a starting point. I think to Don's point, and now to Mary's point tonight, it is only a starting point. But if we don't do something, how many days until town meeting?
202.
202 days until town meeting, and there's a lot less days than that to get something into a warrant and get that before the town of Chatham, or before the town of Harwich to get the votes. Chatham votes against it, and then we end up in a mediation process through the state, correct, Joe?
That's my understanding.
Right. So we're going to maybe not on this round end up in a mediation situation with the town of Chatham, but with what you said, which makes perfect sense, we're gonna end up in a mediation, because Chatham's not gonna volunteer to pay us $3 million extra or whatever it comes out to. It's just not gonna happen. So, in an effort to try and get something done, we have to get something done this year.
Yep.
And I'm not sure there's enough time with a working group to come up with something not to agree on at this town meeting. But I will leave that up to the entire board, and we will bring this back for further conversation next week. And I will defer to Joe for comments after you. Go ahead.
I agree. I think the 612,000 is a tremendous step forward. I don't want to minimize that whatsoever. I applaud Chatham's agreement to that. I think they've agreed to it anyway, or tended, well, the school committee's agreed to it at least. I
And
don't know how.
Chatham stepped up last year and did agree to it and gave us the money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And so I don't want to minimize that at all. I agree 100%. It's a step, but it's not the end game. But I would like to hear if those things were discussed in the working group, the equal evaluation and that sort of thing.
Joe, starting point going forward, the working group is still there, just not meeting.
Correct. My recollection is that, given the action of the school committee, that was meant to give the towns, through boards such as this one, something to review, something to consider in anticipation of the town meetings in the spring. And if there is a desire to go back to the working group, we're all still populated, we stand ready to meet, but really it was meant to spur this type of discussion that's happening tonight, and will continue, later in this month, for you folks to look at what's being proposed. With regard to the Mount Greylock regional agreement, that was discussed. I don't know, and I'm not expert enough to say whether that's what informed the actions that are proposed in the Red Line Agreement, but we did have discussions on that. Again, my take on this is the action of the school committee back in August was meant to give both select boards something by which you could discuss with an eye towards the spring.
Thank you.
If I may, at least in the discussions I was involved, to echo what Joel said, certainly there's acknowledgement by the school superintendent and the school board that we were looking at both a short-term solution and some long-range and discussions on long-term. So not to the detail, John, you've mentioned specifically, but certainly recognition that there's two things going on.
Thank you, Larry. Mary, do you have anything to add?
No, just that, same as Joe, that was discussed. The other part that originally wasn't going to be in the agreement, and I just double-checked, it is. Originally, it was just going to be the operating costs, and that working group suggested that it should include the capital as well. So it will now include the capital, so that's in there.
My intention is to bring this document back on the 25th, I believe is our next meeting after town meeting, for discussion and possible vote to get something on the annual town meeting. Joe, I would, based on the comments, I guess we'll have the conversation that night on whether we want to keep the meetings with the working group going.
Yes.
And if we do, it would be my suggestion, I'm not sure if Chatham has it, but there's no reason why a member of our finance committee shouldn't sit in on those meetings. Okay, moving on to G. Discussion and possible vote. Mary, if you could do a motion on that?
I move that we vote to approve a one-day entertainment license for Mooncusser's Tavern, 86 Sisson Road, October 15th, 2021, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., recorded or live music with amplification and dancing inside.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
And H, Joe, is on you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared to move forward on this item. I will tell you that the document is essentially, or the documents, I should say, are essentially done. However, in reviewing the record that we have, I did have some questions on the town's argument that I'm going to be discussing with Attorney Blake before I do that, so I wanted to make sure. Because once I commit that and it's out, it's out. So I want to make sure that everything is checked and rechecked.
Okay.
So the expectation is that this would come before the board on the October 25th meeting.
Okay. And then how soon will the two restaurants get notification of your decision?
So the second I lock that in, sign it, and send it to the board and town council, once I know the board has it, I would then send it out to the establishments and make them aware of that activity coming up on the 25th.
Okay. This will be on for the 25th. Any comments from the board?
No.
All set?
I'll say.
Get into contracts, and Mary, if you want to read motions?
Sure. I move that we vote to approve a contract with Ballard Mac Sales and Service, Inc. for all work and furnishing services for a Granite 42 FR six-wheel dump truck in the amount of $204,402.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
I move that we vote to approve the license agreement between the Harwich Chamber of Commerce and the town of Harwich for the water station.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
I move that we vote to approve a contract with Motorola Solutions for the upgrade of portable radios, vehicle repeaters, and training for the fire department in the amount of $255,088.32.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any
I
discussion?
like, I'm hoping Joe will give us background on this, because we
Joe?
have some grant money to help out.
Correct. So you may recall that this was a contract that, given that it was for $16,000, was executed by me. However, because it relates to the grant, the board has to sign it because the total value gets that $217,000. So again, the total cost of the town is 16 plus, well within our budget. But what you're being asked tonight is to endorse it by vote and by signature.
And is the motion to include and authorize the chair to sign?
So everything in your packet tonight requires all board members to sign if that's
Okay.
their
Okay.
pleasure.
Don?
Too bad. I like
Thank you,
it.
Mr. Chair. I'd like to note, as I always do, the fire department has been incredible through these recent years in going after grants and being successful at securing them. We're getting a whole lot of value for our 16,000.
Thank you. Any other comments?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
Thank
I
you.
move that we vote to approve a contract with Industrial Protection Services LLC for the purchase of C5 face pieces for self-contained breathing apparatus for the fire department in the amount of $54,088.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Chairman, if I could, just, again, this goes back to the incredibly generous donations of the Stavropoulos family, and I certainly hope I said that right, and our sincerest thanks to them, and what a wonderful tribute.
Thank you for that, Joe. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0. Town administrators report?
Briefly this evening, I will tell you that we have some reports from departments. I wanted to make the board aware of three contracts that have been executed, and then some great town activities that are happening. First, the town has re-signed, if you've heard me mention before, HubTech, AKA HubTech Technical Services. We have them under contract for this fiscal year. That contract is there. They're providing invaluable service for us. The dollar amount comes in at just under $50,000, and they really are the stopgap measure. Some of the outages that we've experienced, we would have been dead in the water for weeks were it not for HubTech and their ability. So we're great to have them remain under contract. There is a contract here regarding the postage meter. Believe it or not, it's a very thin marketplace, so we were able to come to agreement with Pitney Bowes And in this instance, the company is big enough where they don't sign our contract. We use our language and their language and agree to do business together. Then we have Channel 18 has an update on the emergency alert software system. And so we have a procurement for $3,327.49. I want to thank Jamie for her efforts, and also Dan Pelletier in the Water Department to make sure that our emergency alert system is still operational. Last but not least, we have two great events coming up. First of all, this Friday, I'm led to believe by the teenagers in my household that the Monomoy Sharks will be taking on Avon Holbrook for the homecoming game. So Friday night football under the lights, certainly looking forward to that. And then next Friday, in an even more remarkable event, it's the Harwich Youth Services presents the middle school kickball night. And talk about wanting to be a kid again, because this is Friday, October 22nd, from 5 to 7 p.m. under the lights at White House Field. So this would be Monomoy students in grades 5 through 7 playing kickball against members of our local police and fire departments. Go Sharks.
Watch out.
And that's all I have this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Selectmen's report, Don?
I don't have any, but they've got better uniforms, I'm sure.
Mary?
Just kudos to the health department for the flu clinic. I've never done a drive-through before. Very efficient. It was fabulous, so
Pass that along.
kudos
Thank
to
you.
them.
Julie?
Actually, just on that, the first one for the public is tomorrow, right? The 10:13, I think it's 1 to 3,
Correct.
and 10:18. So that's great for the public, too. But I participated, it was wonderful. Great job to the health department. That's it.
I have nothing tonight.
I have nothing. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.